Welcome to the Center for Global Humanities. My name is Anouar Majid, and I am very honored today to introduce Peter Ditto, who is a professor of psychology and social behavior in the School of Social Ecology at the University of California, Irvine. And by the way, I thought Ditto was an Italian name. It is not. Dr. Ditto received his BA from UCLA in 1982 and his PhD from Princeton University in 1986, both in psychology. After a 2-year postdoctoral fellowship at the University of Michigan, he was a faculty member at Kent State University until moving to UCI in 1997. Dr. Ditto is an experimental social psychologist whose expertise is in human judgment and decision-making. His research has been published in top scientific journals such as Psychological Science, Perspectives on Psychological Science, and focuses on hot cognition, how motivation, intuition, and emotion shape and often bias our social, political, moral, medical, and legal judgments. Dr. Ditto is a co-founder of the data collection website yourmorals.org and serves on the board of advisors for civilpolitics.org. His current research is focused on partisan bias, political polarization, and the moral and psychological underpinnings of the culture war in contemporary American politics. Without further ado, and not having found a Trumper among us, I welcome Pete to the audience.
That's a hard act to follow, I think. Well, thanks everybody for coming. It's great to be here. What I want to talk to you about today is politics and morality. But since my mother told me never to talk about those things in public, we're going to start off with a little bit of sports just to ease into this. So my favorite tennis player when I was a kid was John McEnroe. I don't know if people remember him. He's famous for his sort of soft hands and for his tantrums. So let me just play you a little clip of him.
It was the wrong side.
The ball shot came up all over.
No, it was a bit of a spread, Mr. McEnroe. That was a good call.
Excuse me?
That was a bit of a spread.
Look, you can't be serious, man. You cannot be serious! That ball was on the line. Chalk flew up. It was clearly in. How can you possibly call that out? Now, he's walking over. Everyone knows it's in this whole stadium, and you call it out?
No, Mr. McEnroe.
You got the absolute pits of the world, you know that?
I'm going to award a point against you, Mr. McEnroe.
So that was kind of classic John McEnroe tantrum. There's 3 things I want to point out about it. First is he and the umpire looked at exactly the same event and saw something very different, right? Second, they both had evidence for what they saw. So the referee says something about, I saw a gap between the line. John McEnroe says, I saw the chalk fly up, right? He saw this, he's got evidence for his opinions. And third, he's mad, right? He sees something and somebody else sees the world very differently than he does, and it makes him mad. You cannot be serious, right? So what I want to argue is this is kind of a prototype for political judgment in the 2000s here, right? So we all see the same event and we interpret it very differently. And we can just sort of walk through a whole bunch of events just like this. So let's go to something that just happened, the Kavanaugh trial. Justice Kavanaugh and Christine Blasey Ford, watch it. The 2 of them had contradictory evidence. Somebody lied, right? And if you ask people, there's basic polling data. So who believes? Do you think Ford is lying or Kavanaugh's lying? 73% of Democrats think Ford is telling the truth. 74% of Republicans think Kavanaugh's telling the truth, and independents are right in the middle. Watch the same thing, see something different. Well, we can go back in time. What about this all happened because Merrick Garland the Republicans refused to entertain his nomination as the Supreme Court. You asked them, well, should they have voted on him or not? 69% of Republicans say they should have voted on him. 72% of Republicans say not. And independents are right in the middle. Well, what about outside of the judicial arena? Well, is the weather getting more extreme in the past few years? 80% of Democrats say it is. 60-some% of Republicans say it's not, and again, independents are kind of right in the middle, not showing much difference. What about our police in the United States? Tougher on blacks or treat whites and blacks the same. 77% of Democrats think that they're tougher on blacks. 76% of Republicans think the opposite, and independents are right in the middle. And then how about, did Donald Trump know that his campaign had contact with the Russians? 90% of Democrats say yes, 71% of Republicans say no, and again, independents right in the middle. So again, in each of these cases, people see the same thing and they have a different factual judgment. These are factual. These are things that could be true or not true. They are true or not true. We may not know them, well, exactly what's true, but they're things, they're factual statements. The two sides see exactly the opposite thing in there. And this is the sort of central phenomenon that I want to talk about today. This idea of alternative facts, that the two sides in our political battle in the United States very often have different factual beliefs about what's going on. And those factual, what I want to talk about is how those factual beliefs occur and why they make us so mad, right? And so you can see the resemblance of John McEnroe when he's mad at this. Is how some of you may have heard yourself when you saw him. Think about your last political discussion with somebody who thought the opposite that you did. You cannot be serious. How can you believe that? That's crazy, right? That's the phenomenon. And what I want to talk about is kind of how it happens, and then the consequences of it, and how it all plays out in this sort of crazy, corrosive political environment that we're in right now, with two teams lining up on either side and coming to dislike and even hate each other. And I want to talk about three different sort of processes that go on here that I think contribute together to this polarization phenomenon. Talk about moralization, factualization, and socialization. So moralization turns teams into tribes, factualization turns opinions into facts, and socialization takes sort of individual beliefs and turns them into socially accepted truths. So the first step in the process is this moralization. Again, they're not, you shouldn't think of them as steps, they're these sort of interacting processes, right? So this idea of moralization, that politics is always about morality, and it should be about morality. It's about different moral visions and how you realize those moral visions through public policy. But there's something about politics today that it's sort of hyper-moralized, that most of the major issues that we talk about have sort of a moral component to them. Even things that don't have an obvious moral component have been moralized. Things like the environment is a moral issue. Poverty, debt is a moral issue, right? So we invest the events that we talk about with moral significance, so things about right and wrong. And again, that's a sort of a natural process. When two groups interact, they very often have this kind of interaction, particularly, and the problem, right, is that the two sides have different moral sensitivities. So they look at the same issue and they have a different kind of moral reaction. But it's a very, when events become moralized, when the issues become moralized, it's a very different sort of psychological state. So, and it has to do with sort of questioning intention. So this is, if you just kind of an oversimplified view of the world, right? You could say, well, here's these two sets of beliefs. You've got liberal economics 101, which says you should raise taxes on the wealthy, invest in the safety net, raise minimum wages. You've got conservative economics about cutting taxes and cutting safety nets, cutting regulations, right? And there's kind of two different ways you can view that difference of opinion. So these are two different sort of conservative, or two different economic agendas. And the pragmatic view of these things is that, sure, they have this, the other side has the same intention as I do. They want to improve the economy too, but they just have a different way of going about it. They think that's the right way of going about it. We think it's a different way. And at best, it's a difference of opinion. At worst, they're stupid, right? That's a stupid way to do it. You're dumb. That's what's kind of worse you can get to. But once they become moralized, everything becomes very different, right? The moral view is they have a different intention than we have. They don't want to, the liberal economic agenda isn't about, they don't want to get the same things. They're just trying to get power to different people. They just want to redistribute income. Or in a conservative percent, oh, they just don't, they don't even have that intent. They want to destroy the American economy, right? So it's a difference of intention And that in that case, it's not that a difference in policy makes you dumb, it makes you evil, right? You want something bad, you want a different thing than I want, an illicit goal of some kind, right? And so it starts to, when it seeps in like that, when things become moral, right, it heats everything up. The temperature starts to go up. It's a different kind of conversation, right? On top of that, just general moral difference, right? There's another sort of moral aspect I think that's going on in politics today, and that's the politics of grievance, right? And the way I explain it, I'll give you another sort of real world example that I like. So you're station wagon, you got two kids in the back seat, and they start to fight. How many people have been there? Most everybody who's a parent has been there, right? They start beating on each other. What I want to argue is that's sort of the prototype of human conflict. And you say, what's going on back there? I want to know, why are you hitting them? And one says, well, he hit me first. Well, he hit me harder, right? So everybody's got a reason. Everybody's aggrieved. The only reason I hit him is he hit me first. The only reason I'm hitting back is he hit me harder, right? So it's that anger, and the anger that you get then justifies your reaction, and it justifies you going, the reason I can hit you harder is because you hit me first. And now when I hit you back, I'm going to hit you even harder this time, right? And so it has this quality of making people biased, of changing the way, the sort of justification, and tend to escalate the process. The example I give a lot is if you would have asked Democrats 3-4 years ago, do you think it would have been a morally acceptable thing to take a Supreme Court justice away from the Republicans? Most of them probably would have said no. If you ask them today, they'd say absolutely. Well, why? Because it's payback. So it's the payback. The idea is that things are okay. It's okay to do this immoral thing now because it's payback for what I got served with later. And both sides feel that kind of agreement. And that, again, just amps up this moral process. So the whole politics has become this sort of moral minefield, right? Where it's always reasonable to sort of think about political groups as teams. So you've got Republicans and Democrats, and they're groups that have some identity. They're contesting for rewards and power, right? They share some sort of team commitment. They're just, in some ways, they could be like the Yankees and Red Sox. And we know that the Yankees and the Red Sox, that can get pretty fierce, right? You can get pretty ugly just rooting for your own team. Now take that and lay morality over it. When the two teams aren't just arbitrary teams, but they're teams that have different moral sensitivities, then everything really gets amped up. So my right becomes righteous, your wrong isn't just wrong, you're sacrilegious, right? And everything becomes more intense. It makes groups circle around each other, circling around the things that they believe are righteous, rejecting people for the things that they think are sacrilegious, and the conflict intensifies. And a point I really want to make again and again tonight is that these are really natural processes, right? When two groups interact with each other, it very often gets intense. They have a tendency to do that. And when morality is involved, there's a tendency, again, to sort of say one side's bad, evil, the other side's good. But these natural processes can all be dampened down if we want to try, and they can also be amped up, right? That political actors and actions can make these processes more intense. They kind of happen anyway, right? But they can be made more intense. So when this happens, right, when you get this moralization process, you get this sort of good and evil. So these are just quotes from after the Kavanaugh trial. So as Cory Booker says, I'm here to call on folks to understand that in a moral moment, there's no neutral. You're either complicit in the evil or you're fighting against it. And then Donald Trump, I'm not going to say who I mean. I'm just saying you had forces saying things that were evil. They were bad people. He's a very, very fine man. So now it's not just a difference of opinion about Kavanaugh. It's if you're on my side, you're good. If you're on the other side, you're evil. And this is what you see in politics today, this sort of really amped up animosity. And there's lots of data to support this. This is just on your left, again, is a Pew Center research data that shows that 91% of Republicans have a negative attitude, unfavorable attitude about Democrats. 86% of Democrats have a negative attitude about Republicans. That's just an unfavorable even as a majority. So people really don't like each other. The other data on the other side are people who are just leaners, who people say they're independent, and then you ask them, you lean. They lean one way. And they ask you, why do you lean that way? Right? So you might think, well, I lean that way because I kind of like Democrats more than than I like Republicans. Well, when you look at the data, I lean that way because I hate Republicans more than I like to. So you get this negative partisanship. The political scientists are talking a lot about this now. It's not so much that I love my own group. I really hate the other group. And and it's not so much I love Democrats, I just hate those other guys so much. Right? And that's a weird phenomenon. Right? The other thing that's shown a real uptick lately is this. I love this measure. How the percentage of people were upset about their child getting married to a member of the other party. Right? So it's got this huge uptick, right? So now people are more upset about their child marrying somebody of another party than somebody of another race, or maybe even somebody of the same sex, right? So these are, red and blue are the new orange and black, I guess. This just shows this is what we've got. The first step of this is it is through a complicated process, right? The political environment has been moralized, where it's become more like good and evil, more like these tribes that are circling these moral goods and rejecting these other sides, right? It amps up the heat, so the temperature is jacked up in a sense. So then what does that do? So at that point, it's like, okay, fine, right? But there's other processes that contribute to this as well and feed into it. And so what I want to go back to here is this idea of John McEnroe, right? Said he saw the chalk fly up. And that's the interesting part, the chalk, right? It's not just that he saw it. It wasn't just a different opinion. It's, God darn it, I saw the chalk. It had to be in there, right? And so he doesn't recognize that, in fact, maybe he might be biased. He just saw the chalk, and so he has to be right. And this sort of feeds into this other process that I call factualization, how these moral and intense sort of motivational states lead you to change the way you process information in a way that kind of turns your moral opinions into facts, things that are supported by the evidence. So the way I always talk about it is this idea of kind of reverse engineering reality. So if I asked you or anybody else, right, a question about how you come to your political beliefs, right? You'd probably tell me some kind of a story that involved reason, right? You'd say, well, I've got some basic principles that I learned as a kid, some fundamental things, and I combine them with facts about the world, things that I know to be true, and I use my logical capabilities to put them all together, and that's why I'm a liberal or why I'm a conservative, right? And to a certain extent, that is true. People go through that process, but as a psychologist, what I know is from 40, 50 years of research is very often the process runs the other way around as well, that people's prior attitudes, their moral sensibilities, their moral and political intuitions shape the principles that they rely on, the facts that they rely on, the logic that they use, right? It shapes the way you do it in ways that support what you want to believe. So rather than saying, oh, I have these facts and I'm coming up to have this opinion, so I have this opinion and here's the facts that support it. So we recruit principles, facts, and logic to sort of support our opinions and turn them into things that look a lot more like facts, right? So let me just give you a couple of empirical examples of this kind of thing. So one of the first, something you'll hear a lot that gets heard a lot, you may even experience this yourself, is, both sides like to call the other side hypocrites. Right? We get the sense that, oh, boy, those guys, they just don't apply the same standards to their own group. If they were, if a Democrat did that, boy, everybody would go crazy, or, and they say that people are being hypocritical, right? And it's always the other side, but the reason that everybody believes that is because people are super hypocritical, right? People switch principles. As much as politicians want to say they are people of principle, and they do that a lot, what they're really known for is switching principles to support whatever position they have at the time. I could go through lots and lots of examples of this. What I'll use is the filibuster, right? So this idea that you need 60 votes to pass a bill in the Senate, and whether you can ever disallow people from filibustering, whether you can stop that filibuster, right? And the interesting thing is this has gone through all these flip-flops. So when Republicans were in the majority in 2005, Democratic, so Harry Reid on this side, say his principle is filibusters are good. We've got to maintain the filibuster. And Mitch McConnell was saying, no, we got to stop the filibuster. And they weren't arguing we need to stop it because of, it's good for our side. Both sides were saying we got to stop it because it's good for irregardless. This is a fundamental principle. The filibuster is a good thing. You've got to have it to maintain minority rights, or it's a bad thing because it's stopping progress. And they explicitly say it's not about who's in power until the power switches, and then everybody's on the other side. So all of a sudden, just as sincerely, Harry Reid's arguing that the filibuster's bad, and Mitch McConnell's arguing that it's good, and everybody switches it again, framing it in general. And this is of course a truncated slide. It flips back again. So now when the Republicans are in charge, and they charge that everybody's on the other side again, right? So this is what happened. People state it as principle, but they recruit the principle to support whatever opinion it is that they have at the time. So of course these guys are doing it, and they may be just saying things. So let's look at some, I've got lots and lots of experiments like this. This is just one of them where we present people with some basic scenarios that are they're designed to be matched, where we create these little bizarro worlds where one's kind of a pro-liberal version and pro-conservative version. This is something that we do a lot. So in this case, we simply told them, had them read a little scenario where a Muslim protester was burning an American flag and proclaiming America evil, or a Christian protester who was showing cartoons of Muhammad and proclaiming Islam evil, again showing depictions of the Prophet Muhammad as unacceptable. And this came from a real life story that was going on at the time where conservatives were going out and trying to show these as an act of free speech. And so we just had them read those scenarios. Then we asked them questions like, do you support this? And generally, do you endorse the general principle that free speech is crucial to government independent of, even if it's offensive to some? Right, so they're endorsing this fundamental principle of free speech. And what you see is, again, we have liberal conservatives and liberal participants and conservative participants. And when it's about flag burnings, the liberals are all in on free speech. I think that's totally important, right? And the conservative participants less so. When you switch it to Prophet Muhammad, all of a sudden the free speech advocates become the conservatives, and the liberals are saying, not so much on the free speech. A little more lukewarm on it. Right? Of course, these are just people, right? Our elected officials and judicial, appointees don't do this. Well, here's a wonderful study by Lee Epstein, a legal scholar, where they analyzed the Supreme Court decisions, and again, so they decide on free speech sorts of issues a lot, and some of them are sort of conservative free speech issues, like usually religious freedom of some kind, or there's kind of liberal free speech issues, which are whistleblower kind of things very often. And you look to see in which times they side with free speech versus not. And if you look at the conservative justices, they show a clear pattern where they're much more likely to decide on the basis of free speech if it's conservative free speech than if it's liberal free speech. And if you look at the liberal justices, they do something of the opposite, right? Not quite as intensely, but in the opposite. Everybody flips. So it's free speech when I like the speech that you're making, right? But again, we frame it as these principled judgments. And by grounding things in principle, it's a way of kind of making it factual. It's saying, well, I'm just not making this up, right? I have this basic principle of free speech, and I'm following that, and that's this important thing, and I'm just being principled, right? That's something that politicians say a lot, and it grounds and makes your decisions seem less arbitrary, in a sense. And again, people do it in this biased fashion. Another stereotype that we have about the other crowd is that they're stupid. Like, how can you believe that when people have different factual beliefs, right? If somebody believes something very differently than you believe, the most obvious thing is you're stupid, right? And both sides hurl these, all right, what's great, you can go on the internet and you can always find the sort of mirror image memes around here, right? So, and that's clearly the case. So, and the issue really is that our ideology changes the way we recruit facts. Our morality does that. So let me ask you a question with a show of hands. How many people here Raise your hand if you think enhanced interrogation like waterboarding is morally wrong. So if you think it's morally wrong, raise your hand. Okay, lots of people. Okay, now put your hands down. How many people think that enhanced interrogation is effective in fighting terrorism? I see maybe 2, right? So that's, the question is, why do people so often believe that what's morally wrong is practically ineffective? Right, that's a really common, you almost never find anybody that says, oh, it's morally wrong, but it's effective, which is a perfectly reasonable thing to believe. And in fact, that's sort of the essence of morality. Morality, the moral choice doesn't have to be the most effective choice. And in fact, that's sort of what morality is about. It says that some things are just wrong, even if they would lead to better consequences. I could change medical science today if I could take all of you guys and start hacking out part of your brains and see what you couldn't do anymore, right? I might even save millions of lives, but it would be wrong, right? I think it would be wrong. So so morality doesn't have to, there's this sort of, inconsistency between them, or potentially, so these moral stands, when people say, no, I could do that, but it would be morally wrong, those things happen, and they're striking when they happen because they're so rare, right? And they're rare because they're psychologically difficult. It's hard to believe that something that is the morally good thing to do might not lead to the best consequences, or something that's the morally bad thing to do might actually lead to better consequences. People find that troubling, right? And so what happens is, what we've looked at over years of research is that people tend to adjust their cost-benefit beliefs to fit their gut moral reactions. So when they think something's morally wrong, they figure it out, so, oh yeah, it probably doesn't work anyway. And if it's morally good, oh yeah, it does kind of work. Right? And you see that pattern a lot. And that changes, what you get is that different people have different moral beliefs, and so it changes the factual beliefs that they have. Here's just a little more data. So this is a study that we had 1,500 or so people come to our website, yourmorals.org. It's a data collection website that I created with Jonathan Haidt about 10 years ago. You can go and fill out questionnaires if you're interested, and gives you feedback and tells you all about them. But we had people come to this website, and they made judgments about 4 different moral dilemmas in the political realm: death penalty, enhanced interrogation, embryonic stem cell research, and teen condom education. They all have a certain quality where it's you have to do a bad thing to get a good consequence. So do you have to execute somebody to deter future crime? Do you have to use an embryo to cure disease? So they all have that same kind of quality to them, right? And we asked them a whole bunch of questions about them. So the things that are central here, we asked them, how moral or immoral is that? And we asked it in a certain way. I say inherent morality because we said, would this be wrong even if it produced good consequences, right? So they said, rated these things from whether they'd be really wrong or not so wrong. Then we asked them about the different benefits that they might have. So, does the death penalty deter crime? Or, what's the probability that people are executed, unjustly, which is the cost, right? So we asked them all those sorts of things. And what we found across all of these different issues, and since then maybe 5 or 6 more, is this particular pattern where the more morally wrong they think it is, the fewer benefits they think it has, and the more cost they think it has. Again, even though they're saying it's morally wrong, even if it has good consequences. Like, so for an example, the more participants believed that condom education was immoral, even if it was effective, the less they believed condoms were effective, and the more they thought that condom education just encouraged teens to have sex, right? So they construct a world where this thing that I think is wrong, I don't want to endorse condom education, so it doesn't work. It doesn't even work anyway. In fact, it has all these bad consequences, right? And so people recruit those sorts of beliefs. We've done a couple of experiments where we manipulate their morality, how they feel about, for example, about the death penalty, try to make them endorse it more or endorse it less without talking about any effects. And then if you look at it, if we make them believe that the death penalty is more moral, they also think it's more effective and has fewer costs, right? We make them think it's more immoral. They think it's less likely to deter crime and more likely to produce wrongful executions. So there's this weird link that the people have these moral intuitions, and they create facts that support their moral intuition. So if they think that a certain kind of economic strategy is good, right, we need to cut down on those. We need to teach people, I have this moral intuition that we've got to teach people right from wrong. Right? They have to be able to work, right? You got to work, or that's the morally right thing to do. And they convince themselves that morally right thing to do is going to increase the GDP, right? That's going to make the economy better. Liberals think, oh, they have this sense, oh, I want to help disadvantaged people. I want to help these people that are suffering. And they think, well, if I help those people, you know what? It's going to make the economy get better. And those things are completely separate judgments, but they almost always go together, right? So people think that the things they think are morally right are also practically effective. So that's the kind of pattern that you see where moral intuitions can change the factual beliefs that people have. And how does that kind of happen at a process level? Well, let me tell you a little bit about the way people think about positive and negative information, this idea of motivated skepticism. So the general idea of motivated reasoning or motivated skepticism is that we're simply less skeptical consumers of information we want to believe than information we don't want to believe. Right? When you get something that supports your political beliefs, you go, yeah, that sounds right. And you get something that challenges your political beliefs, you go, wait a minute, I have some data. I remember somebody talking about that. And you go through it and you think about it much more critically. Right? And so you end up kind of sucking in the information that supports your beliefs and finding flaws with the information it doesn't. Here's a classic example of this. Is a study by Lord, Ross, and Lepper in 1979. They essentially they presented college students, Stanford students, with scientific studies that were talking about whether the death penalty has deterrent efficacy, right? Whether it reduces future crime, future murders, right? And they developed a whole sort of methodology, right? So it was a study described in a fair amount of methodological detail where they compared states to each other that had the death penalty or not, and there was another one. And they just took the same methodology and then they changed the results. So in one case, in one version of it, it showed that the death penalty did deter crime, and the other version, they showed that it didn't deter crime. But it was exactly the same methodology, right? So and then they brought in people who were pro-death penalty or anti-death penalty. Same sort of strategy you've seen before, right? And then they asked them how good a study was. They had them read the study and they said, how good a study was that? Right? Was that a good scientific study? Was that well conducted? And what you find is this interesting pattern where for if the study was anti-deterrence, the opponents of capital punishment thought it was a great study. The proponents of capital punishment thought it wasn't so good, right? If you, again, in the pro-deterrence study, the liberals thought it wasn't such a good study. The pro-capital punishment people thought it was a great study, right? And the important point is it's the same study. It's always the same methodology. The way they counterbalance everything, it's exactly the same methodology that just changed the results. And that methodology is a good methodology if it supports what you already believe. It's a bad methodology if it doesn't. And that's sort of the phenomenon, right? We can't find the things that support us. We say, that seems like good, strong evidence. This other stuff, we start to derogate it. And it happens at all kinds of levels, right? So here's another phenomenon. This is from just down the road. I think it was a Dartmouth student, Dinesh D'Souza, famous conservative, just pardoned by Donald Trump not long ago. And this happened in, I think, 2015, where he sees this picture of Hillary Clinton, and he says, look closely at the Hillary photo. Isn't that a Confederate flag behind her on the shelf, right? So there that is. So he tweets this out, and within about 15 minutes, people come back at him and say, dude, that's not real, right? That's a fake doctored photo, so the real one doesn't have that, right? So, and that's how many people have been in this situation. You find something that you support on Facebook or Twitter, and you send it back out again, then somebody tells you, that was fake news, right? And you go, oh. Or people more often have had it the other side. How many people have seen one, gotten it from some conservative or liberal friend, mostly conservative friends, it sounds like, here, and you immediately say, that's wrong, come on, and you look it up on Snopes or on one of these other fact-check websites, right? That's it, that's the phenomenon. It comes in, and you accept it as true, and then you share it, right? And if it comes in and you don't like it, then you challenge it. That's the real phenomenon here that where a lot of the action is that being too uncritical of information that supports your views. That's, in a sense, what the Russian sort of bot situation was they flooded the zone with all this information that was too good to be true, right? It was just, oh, Hillary eats kittens? Oh, I knew it, right? I knew that was true, or the other way around, right? That Donald Trump eats kittens, whatever it is, right? People take it in if it supports their beliefs, and they don't critically evaluate it sufficiently. And that's the way you build up these different factual beliefs that people have, so that people have these moral intuitions, and it seems like the facts are on their side. They can see the chalk. Oh, my favorite part of this, too, was Dinesh D'Souza's response afterwards was, but even if it was made up, boy, what about those glasses and that hairdo? Didn't even mention the pants, right? So, yes, it's one of the other things about morality that is so powerful, right, is that it's got this spread where if you think somebody's a bad person, right, you think they're bad kind of in every way, even when it doesn't kind of make logical sense. Like the fact that Hillary Clinton's a closet Confederate racist, I mean, it doesn't even fit with the stereotype, right? I mean, if you saw that she was some radical feminist, something or other, maybe it would kind of fit. But once you're bad in all kinds of ways. It has this huge bandwidth, right, where you can take in almost anything that seems bad about a person because their moral character seems bad. So that's the facts part. Finally, a little quick thing. Another really common stereotype you hear is that the other side's illogical, right? It's like, oh my God, did you hear that guy on the radio? It just didn't make any sense. He's saying this Trump guy was saying this and that, and I didn't get it, right? So you think that they're illogical in some way. My arguments are based in logic, theirs aren't so much. And there's good evidence that your ideology changes what you perceive as logic, right? So this is a study of ours. We've done a whole bunch of many people have done studies like this over the years. This was just published. I can't believe it got published because literally I think it was first done in like 1936. But the basic idea is we gave people a bunch of logical syllogisms, right? So two premises and a conclusion. And those have been used for years in psychology to understand people's ability to logically reason. Do the conclusions follow, or does the conclusion follow from the premises? You're not supposed to be evaluating the accuracy of the statement. You're told and given these clear instructions, just evaluate whether it's logical or not, right? And then what we do in these studies is change the conclusion so the conclusion's either sort of conservative friendly or liberal friendly, right? And we see how well people do on these things. Are they able to figure out the logic? These are two syllogisms that happen to be invalid, right? So they're actually illogical. Things that harm the economy burden job creators. Tax increases burden job creators. Tax increases harm the economy. Does anybody know why that's wrong? You got to switch. It's called affirming the consequent. So it's correct if you say things that, I hate doing this live because things that harm the economy burden job creators, tax increases harm the economy, therefore tax increases burden the economy would be logical, but the other isn't, right? But both of these two syllogisms have exactly the same structure. They're both illogical, and the question is, do people pick it up? You look at liberals and conservatives separately, and what you see is the first one, liberals get right more than 83%, they get it right. Conservatives only get 61% right. So they're going, no, that's wrong. It's got the bad conclusion. Yeah, I can see the illogic in that. Conservatives miss it and say, oh yeah, it seems logical to me. You might say, oh yeah, that's because liberals are better reasoners. Then you go to the next one and you find exactly the flip. So in the next one, liberals miss it, right, because it's got a friendly conclusion for them. They think it's valid when it's not, and conservatives are more likely to pick up on it. Right? And that's when you see something where you don't like the conclusion, you tend to think that's illogical. And so we don't agree on logic because we have different preferences for the conclusions that come up. So even our logic can get kind of warped by the ideology. So a question that has come up a lot, may have come up to you while you're thinking and listening tonight, is, gee, I wonder, is this on both sides? Or is one side more biased than the other? And this is actually a question that has a long history in psychology. It goes all the way back to Adorno's famous book about the authoritarian personality, which is kind of an attempt to understand Nazi Germany and why some people have some sympathy for authoritarian governments. And the idea was there was this sort of personality type that it was originally a psychodynamic explanation about, you know, your father was harsh in your parenting, and so you can't accept bad things in yourself, and you tend to be a black and white thinker. And so when other, you know, things like when you're not doing well in life, you can't think that you're doing badly. So, you know, this must be those black people or those Latino immigrants or whatever it is, right, that does it, right? So the idea is that conservatism and particularly this authoritarian personality is associated with bias, right? So if you want to know who's biased, it's those right-wing guys are biased and the left-wing people are less so. Right, and there's a whole other tradition that's been invigorated recently in particular. It says, oh, you know, they're really kind of the same, that the two sides are equally biased, and many of the phenomena you can find on the right, you can kind of find some version of it on the left. And so, you know, psychologically, we should think they're more similar, and so I think they're more similar. So you've got these two competing hypotheses, what we call the asymmetry hypothesis and the symmetry hypothesis. And the question is, well, I wonder which one's true. Or let's see what kind of data we can collect. That's what I thought when I did this. So I tried, the first strategy that I adopted was to do what's called a meta-analysis, which is to find, there's a whole bunch of studies that were done that look a lot like this Lord Ross and Lepper study that I showed you before, right? Where you've got exactly the same information, essentially, right? Same scientific study that's just tilted, be liberal friendly or conservative friendly, and you get liberals and conservatives do it. And you wonder, well, I wonder, who's more biased? Well, one way to judge the bias, right, is to look at who responds more differently. So again, these are the same stimulus, the same study. Well, here, do liberals, they like the anti-deterrence one more than the pro-deterrence one. Conservatives show the opposite, and you can then get an effect size. You can figure out, well, how big is that difference between liberals and how big is that difference between conservatives? And let's pull all these together and see, overall, is there a tendency for one group to kind of treat information that's friendly to their politics more positively than the opposite, right? Is one group more likely to do that than the other? So in this study, we found 51 experiments. These are all laboratory experiments. So we tried to make these are tightly controlled laboratory experiments where essentially the identical information is presented and it's just flipped around, right? We found 51 of those with about a little over 18,000 subjects total, again, using these matched experimental designs. And what we found is that both sides were biased, right? So both sides, conservatives, again, to the right here is, you know, viewing the conservative information more positively than the liberal information. The left is liberal more positive than the conservative, right? And both sides are biased in their own direction, right? So conservatives like pro-conservative information more than virtually identical pro-liberal information, the opposite for liberals, and they're biased to virtually the identical degree in this. Now, I can already hear you, right? I hear what's inside your heads, right? So you have to think what this is sort of, it's studying bias in a vacuum, right? So these are tightly controlled experiments where we present people with this information that's really tightly controlled, right, to be identical. And what this really shows is that both sides have the general tendency, right, to the susceptibility to this kind of bias, which is perfectly reasonable, right? This is our nature. People are tribal by nature. This is deeply embedded in our evolutionary history. We're just nicer to people who are in our group than aren't. It's at that level, it makes perfect sense that everybody would show this, right, as a general, in these controlled experiments. Now, that doesn't mean that in the real world that's always going to manifest itself like that. There are lots of historical forces, lots of other forces about how intensely people feel morality or not. And so it doesn't say that out in the real world necessarily liberals and conservatives are equally biased, right? It says that both have that tendency, right? And what I like to emphasize that suggests a lot, very often in this literature, liberals are treated as kind of like the rational baseline. Like these people are perfectly rational processes, and then there's these other guys. What I want to tell you is that's not, in my experience, that's not true, right? So everybody's got the susceptibility to this. It can be manipulated by forces, and both historical and personal, it's all possible. So everybody, this is a basic tendency of people that everybody needs to be mindful of. One other little finding out of this meta-analysis I think is interesting. So some of the studies had to do with science. They were like those, that study I showed you on the death penalty where there was actual science that they were processing. Some of the studies were just anecdotal things like, oh, you know, somebody, if your president fires a general, is that a good or bad thing? Right, and then they're either a liberal or conservative president, things like that aren't scientific. And we thought, well, maybe, you know, the answer that people often give to bias is, we'll just give them the science, right? If you give the science, that'll correct everything. Well, what we see is you can see the effect up there for the non-science information, 0.24 and 0.22, minus 0.22. And if anything, the effect just gets bigger when you give them the scientific information. So the scientific information just gets sucked into that partisan vortex. It's interpreted as, you can always find the flaws in the studies you don't like, support, you know, you can find the good qualities of the studies that you like, right? So the science doesn't seem to help, right? So now we've got this moralized process. Everybody's angry and it's changing the way you're perceiving the information. And you know, so you've got these ideas that how does it get stamped in more? And that's this kind of process of socialization, right, that I want to talk about last, which is, we all know, everybody knows about Wikipedia. Did you know that there's a site called Conservapedia that has all conservative facts in it? Right, so if you want to find out something, I still do it. I look at Wikipedia, I want to find out what the facts are. Well, you can go to a different encyclopedia entirely and find different facts. There's that idea that both sides have their own sets of facts and that you've got to teach those to people, right? And so this idea, the last thing that happens is once you have these ideas, you bias the processing, it goes through this process of being stamped in by other people. And when I talk about socialization, I'm talking about just the way you might have heard about it in your intro to sociology class, right? Is people just learning the norms and values of a culture. In this case, we're talking about a political culture, right? And you learning what's true from that culture. And the problem is we've got these different cultures and different media systems to support them. So, you know, the real thing that is different now historically, right, from in the past, partisans have always been around. They've always probably biased the facts that they believe, but now there's a media environment that helps to support that. So as I like to say, you know, I grew up in a 3-channel world, right? There was CBS, NBC, ABC, and there were a couple of other little stations, that was it. You know, I might hear some crazy thing during the day that I wanted to believe, but then I went home and at 6 o'clock or whatever, Walter Cronkite told me what the truth was. I said, oh, well, I guess I was wrong, right? That's not the way it works anymore, right? So people don't go back to some single, you know, sort of unitary media environment. There are hundreds or thousands of media outlets on television, the internet, newspapers, you know, everywhere, blogs, right? And you can find the ones that fit your taste. This is a pretty famous graph here that you see where the media outlets are ranked on whether they basically are detail-oriented, fact-oriented or not, and whether they veer left or veer right. And again, you see AP at the very top, C-SPAN, Bloomberg, NPR, right in the middle, and then you see the kind of less fact-oriented ones, right, going. And we know this, right? Everybody knows this. Everybody knows which stations you would go to or which places you go to get conservative news, which ones you go to liberal news, right? And then you learn that those are the things that must be true because there's people who look like real people. Everybody's got a tie on, everybody looks very respectable, and they're telling you in a straight face what the truth is. The problem is that you're hearing different truth, right? So there's sort of 2 effects, I think, that are worth talking about here. The first is this kind of selective exposure and group polarization, right? So people selectively, you know, it's been known for years, right? People selectively expose themselves to information that supports their views. So people disproportionately, if they think some media source is going to support their views, they're more likely to tune into that than another. And this has the tendency to polarize people, to reinforce and polarize. So you say, yeah, I heard this crazy thing, you know, about Hillary, and then I go to Fox News and I go, yeah, they're saying it too. Yeah, it must be true. It's not just me that believes this, right? It's other people, reasonable people that look like they're news people, right? Who are news people, And they say these things, right? So you kind of believe it. And this process, it happens on the media, right? And there's good, and it's been increasing. So this is some data from a study of one of my graduate students who looked at Pew Research data from 2000 to 2012, and he calculated a measure. So we have measures of how liberal or conservative they are, and he calculated a measure of how much they were likely to sort of exclusively look at their own kind of media environments. And what you see is that again, on your left is that selective exposure has been increasing from 2000, right? So the lines are going up. And in that case, what you see is that Republicans are a little bit more, and they're significantly more likely to selectively expose than Democrats are. So there's a small effect, but it's there, right? So you might say, oh, yeah, that kind of helps support my views. Then what's interesting is if you break it out by extremity, right? In this case, there's liberals, conservatives, and very liberals, and very conservatives. And what you see is the one group that really stands out is the extreme conservatives. They're the ones that are up there at the top here, right? So that line is the extreme conservatives. The moderate conservatives are actually down here at the lowest. They're the least likely to selectively expose, right? But you get the kind of extreme groups up here and the other groups here. So you get what we're seeing is in particular like one group who's really ensconcing themselves in these kind of informational bubbles. Right, but it's kind of going up in general, but there's one group for whom it's going up in particular. Of course, it happens on the web in various ways. These are just data from a study that was in Proceedings of the National Academy of Science recently. These are just the probability of a tweet with moral political content being retweeted. Right, and so what you see is it's really dense, but essentially people only retweet things that they really like. So there's a big clump of red, there's a big clump of blue. There's a little bit going through where people occasionally go across, but essentially if you're on Twitter, right, you're mostly seeing things that just support your own view, or you're retweeting those things. At least it's not necessarily you're seeing them, but you're retweeting those. Those are the ones that you're sharing and reinforcing each other. The whole thing goes down even farther into where we live. Right, so there's this wonderful book that was written, 10 years ago by Bill Bishop called The Big Sort, where he talked about how we're sorting each other politically in the country, where it used to be the case that your neighbor might be a liberal, might be a Democrat, or might be a conservative you didn't know, and increasingly we tend to live in places that are almost exclusively liberal, almost exclusively conservative. We're sorting ourselves. And these are, again, from 1992 to 2012, and the colored sections are the ones of the landslide counties, right, where one side overwhelms the other. You see that mostly on the 1992, it's mostly gray, right? There's only a few of those, and with time, what you see is it just gets more and more filled in, so that these are all places where you get really homogenous sort of political cultures, right? So not only do you not see it you don't see the opposite opinions on the news or on Twitter, you don't see it when you're walking around your neighborhood. Most of the people tend to share your own views. Not everybody, but lots. So we build these places where these new facts that we have that support our political views just get reinforced by the people around us. The media, the social media environment, even our everyday lives we live in these kind of residential safe spaces. Where we are less likely to hear somebody who doesn't believe what we believe than who does, right? So it creates these kind of, we seem to be putting ourselves in these little bubbles. And the other thing, the second effect is I like to call this idea of fact inoculation, which is that once you're told that one kind of media is good, that means another kind of media is bad. That means that anything you hear on that media, you could just ignore. It sort of inoculates your facts, right? So our media is accurate. Ours is fair and balanced. Theirs isn't, right? Therefore, their facts are fake news. Anything I hear on, you can't trust anything on the mainstream media. You can't trust anything on MSNBC or whatever else, any version of that, right? That you hear. And so it helps that any fact that you hear on your media, you can sort of discount the other side's facts, right? And a good example of that is the Fox News is, in several recent polls, right, is the most trusted news source in America. It, at the same time, is also the least trusted source, right? So some people trust them a lot, some people don't trust them at all. That kind of tells the story. And we know that if you mistrust is what I often call the Swiss Army knife of motivated reasoning, right? If you can just distrust the media, you could just discount anything. It doesn't matter. You don't have to worry about the facts of global warming, or you just say, oh, I just don't believe any of that, right? If you can get people to not believe in the media, right, then that's really powerful. It allows you to shape things. And again, that's what Donald Trump has done. This idea about the media, you can't trust anything. You can't, that's fake news. They're the enemy of the people, right? You can't believe them. And then you don't have to fight with all the details of them. You just say, you can't trust any of that, right? And that just reinforces your political view. So we've got these three forces, right? Moralization, factualization, and socialization. And again, they're sort of like, you can think of them as kind of a lens or a looking glass that we see each other through. There's genuine moral differences between the two groups. There's partisan bias. There's selective media exposure. And when we look through that lens, we see a different view, right? So the other side becomes these terrible people who everything they do is terrible. They're hypocritical and they're stupid and they're illogical, right? And you know they're evil, and that has that kind of through these processes they contribute to this kind of polarization where you're pulling people apart, and it has a cascading set of effects. These misperceptions and partisan animosity. The idea that there's alternative facts and fake news, when that just reinforces the animosity. Right? It creates dysfunctional government. It's really hard to run a government when you have different sets of facts. Difference of opinion can be overcome to a certain extent. Different facts are much harder to get around. And consequently, you get a lot of the government doesn't work, nothing gets done, shuts down all the time. You get anger and loss of trust in institutions, which is what you see now. People really, derogating government, and that also has the effect very often of leading people to seek out kind of more populist leaders. People are anti-government, right? And this is the trend that's going on, not just in the United States, but all over the world. Right? So it has this sort of cascading set of effects. And what I like to talk about is what we're in now is this outrage spiral, where we get this partisan animosity. The two sides hate each other, right? It biases the way they perceive each other. Right? The more you bias the way you perceive each other, the more you hate each other. The more you hate each other, the more biased you are. And the whole thing just cycles through, right? Where it's just feeding each other. If somebody believes something very strongly that you don't believe is true, it makes you angry. And just like John McEnroe, you say, I don't like you, Mr. Umpire. You're the pits of the world because you believe something different than I do. And the whole thing just sort of cycles through, right? So how do we fix it? And again, I always say this is the shortest part of my talk, and I'll just talk really quickly about a few. It's really hard. It's a super hard problem to solve because it's multi-determined and it's very natural, right? It's a sort of natural cycle. There's things at sort of the big level we might be able to do. Lessen the influence of money in politics. Money in politics has its perverse incentives. All the money, the business model is conflict. That's true for political parties. That's true for political media. Nobody wants to see a whole bunch of people getting along. We want to see people fighting, and that's where the money is. That's where you can make people hate the other side. There's more money in it, so get that out. A third party might do it, right? So one of the problems, you've got two groups that are locked in this kind of moral combat. If you could kind of get another party in there, it sort of breaks things up. That might be helpful. This is an interesting one, the idea of the 5-day congressional work week. So this is sort of a historical example. When Newt Gingrich came on to be Speaker of the House, I think it was 1992, in the kind of Republican Revolution. One of the first things he did was shorten the congressional work week to 3 days, told his congressman, you need to go home. Don't live in Washington. Washington's corrupting. You got to go home. You got to make money anyway. It was more money in politics. You got to be fundraising. So they stopped living in Washington. So before that, these people lived together. Kids went to soccer games together. They had barbecues together. It's really hard to demonize somebody if you have a relationship with them in some sense. It's much easier if you never see these people, you just come in and do business, you caricature them, right? So if we got these people to sort of spend more time together, it's harder to hate each other. And the last one in this category is what I call civic inspiration. So everybody talks about civic education. I think it's more than that. This is a hot process, right? So this is a motivate everything. You got to get people not just to know what civics are, but to believe in it and to see the grandeur and the awe of the American system and how powerful it is. If they feel that, right, maybe they'll adhere to it more, right? But you got to inspire them. On a smaller level, right, so those things are all hard to, it's hard to do those things, right? On an everyday level, you can do some sort of more effective things. Intellectual humility, courage. So if you can kind of believe that you don't maybe know all the answers, that's really helpful. And if you're brave enough to know, maybe I'm wrong, and I can take it. I'm strong. Those sort of mental virtues, David Brooks talks about mental virtues a lot, and it's kind of interesting, if you can do those in your own lives, it's helpful. Search for diverse media. So don't just stay in your bubble, look for other media. Fact check information, especially information that you want to believe. That's where you're vulnerable, right? It's not, people are really good at checking information they don't want to believe. Information that supports their beliefs, that's when the problem is. And finally, try this idea of the shoe on the other foot test, right? So every time you just say, well, gee, would I think the same thing if that was a Democrat that did that? Would I think the same thing if that was a Republican? Would it kind of go, and just that mental operation of trying to check yourself a little bit and see if you'd think the same thing if the shoe was on the other foot. Those are at least some ways to kind of break out of this outrage spiral potentially. The other thing I would tell you, as I always do, is to go vote. And thank you very much for listening, and I'm happy to take questions.